morning, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about what is an access review and why should I perform one. Guest speakers today, we have Garrett Grajek, Robert Emrich, and Tyab Timor. The agenda for today. I already went over the introductions. So next we're going to go over why should we have an access review, roles-based access controls, least privilege access concept, formalized review procedures, conducting a review, access reviews, an audit checklist. We're going to go over UITest and access reviews. We're going to do an actual live demo, an access review demo. We're also going to answer any questions that you may have. Next, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Robert Emrich, and he's going to go over why are we here.
Thanks, Ashley. Welcome, everyone, and hope everyone's having a good day. This is a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and I've been in cybersecurity and IT security, really GRC for a lot of years, let's put it that way, but at least 20 years doing this. It seems like this is one of the most basic things when it comes to general controls, we call it, and it seems like even these days there's still a lot of ways we can improve. So looking at the screen, I listed this. I do a lot of work with the DoD, and if any of you are familiar with the new cybersecurity maturity model certification, this is derived from that. And I think the main part of the game is protecting our information, and what's the best way to protect the information with prevent controls such as passwords and PINs and multi-factor authentication. So all this kind of ties into what we're talking about today. But we're going to talk about it more in how do we set this up and what are the best tools to use to be able to achieve our goals. But if you're looking at this, you see some various incidents that have occurred in the past. Some are government focused, but I could give you so many more things that are on the public side as well. There's just never a day goes by when we don't have a breach. And I think, do we have adequate security? Have we done the right access level reviews? And that's what we're going to cover today in our webinar between my firm, Risk Cop Advisory, partnering with UITest, my partner. Next slide.
We're now going to go over what is an access review, and we're going to continue on with Robert.
So we're kind of asking the question, what is a user access review? How do we define that? And why should we do that? And how often should we do it? So those are some of the things I'm going to try to define here quickly. And then my partner firm is going to go through some solutions they have, which is a tool I use myself and recommend that makes the setting up of these reviews very simple, but yet controlled. So the definition for user access review is simply a periodic inventory of access rights to certain networks and systems and the users who have access permissions into those networks and systems. So in speaking in simplified terms, it's basically identifying what are the layers of security? What are the various layers? You think of an egg, what are the ways to go down through that egg and make sure that each layer is secure? That's kind of what I do as a cybersecurity expert or risk manager to my clients. And how do I know that each layer is properly protected? You never want to say one area is more important than the others. They all work in tandem. And I think that's the whole idea between access reviews is to know exactly which networks are actually most key, and then you drill down from there. We do look at our data. We also look at intellectual property, things like that. But we also want to just focus on what are the various layers to make sure that no one can circumvent and get into those critical pieces of information. So it's looking at who accesses what. You have the right level of access based on your job role and valid reasons for those rights. All those things should be documented in a system of record. It should never be informal. It should always be formally assigned from day of start of your employment, your assignment, what have you, to the day you leave the organization. And then parties define, and I list that in the third bullet, is employees, full-time and part-time, third-party contractors, and even vendors. So there's a lot of people that have access to your systems. And hopefully at all times you know who those people are, because that's very, very important. And that's the whole purpose of what we're going to be talking about today. I'm a big governance person. So if you're familiar with governance, it's policies, procedures, and standards. You really start with that. And I'm going to give you a sample one in a few slides, is really making sure that you have it formalized. Because one of the things is I've run into situations where there's a breach of the network, there's a breach of security or there's an investigation, and you really need to make sure that if it gets to a point where you have law enforcement or investigators involved, you really need to make sure that the company is covered in terms of being able to look into things, as well as sanctions for what happened, including up to legal issues when it comes to breaches and breaking of laws. And one of the things at the very bottom, I mentioned, I'm a risk manager, so it could, by not having adequate security and user access reviews, it could really result in compliance risk, reputation risk for the organization. I've seen so many organizations go down just as a result of not having adequate security and then paying the damages later in the media or from a service disruption.
Next, we're going to continue on with Robert. So why should we have an access review?
So these should, I know many of you are in this space or obviously work with the auditors, and this is a typical area that's asked for, whether you're dealing with the financial auditors to a more technical audit. There's all kinds of different audits. I've worked with them all. If you've worked with SOC 1, SOC 2 reviews, I mentioned the CMMC, but almost every type of discipline covers access security. So the first thing is, can you certify user access controls easily? How do you do that? One of the things I find when going to certain clients or working on certain projects is, I think there's a kind of a general understanding of what needs to be done, but when it comes down to it, is showing that, did you actually go and do the reviews, and how do you sign off on them, and how do you ensure there's the right population of individuals that are, you're getting the full population. And then when you review the full population, whoever reviews that, it's not just IT, it involves the business. Is it properly vetted and signed off? And if any exceptions are noted, are they investigated and removed immediately? Because those result in audit exceptions if you have a subsequent audit report. And we're talking about not only saying, does the person have access? Is it appropriate? Do they still work for the organization or the department? Because sometimes it revolves around transfers. And I think Garrett will cover that later in his presentation, levers, movers, and joiners. But have you also looked at the access privileges for the various individuals, employees, contractors, vendors, things like that? Because a lot of them have very high level access to things that they should not have, and their access should be reduced. And maybe it's only temporary access is needed. I'll cover that in a little bit. You want to make sure that you never grant more access than you really need, and you always want to question access. There's never a harm in questioning access, especially for those you feel have too much authority. And then that's exactly what I'm saying. And the third bullet is access privileges. I not only look at general access, you think of individuals, and I'll talk about this a little bit with roles-based access controls, but it's like individuals in certain departments have access to financial functions. Maybe it's logistics, supply chain. Maybe it's more, it could be an operational type area. But then there's sometimes you're given extra privileges because there's a reason for that. That should be documented. That should be documented in your ticket system. If you're familiar with change control, it's kind of the same thing. You put a ticket in, make sure that that access is documented, and then when it's no longer needed, it's removed. I think one of the things is important too is a lot of the areas that's looked into by the auditors is separation of duties. I can tell you that my partner firm here, UITest, through their solution, has an excellent way to handle separation of duties. So if that's an area that's plaguing you sometimes and saying, I don't know how we can document adequate separation of duties, then UITest is a tool to go to. And for those of you who are not familiar with separation of duties, just to get back to the basics, it's having an individual that has incompatible functions in terms of ability to do various functions in a process that could lead to fraud or to fraud issues, or it could really lead to other types of irregularities. So we want to make sure that those areas are flushed out, removed quickly if we notice there's separation of duties. And UITest is a tool that really will help you do that. A lot of the various disciplines and certifications look for those types of things and make sure that they're eliminated. And then the next thing is, can you be certain you have the entire population of users, systems, applications? I'm working with a Department of Defense prime contractor right now, and there's hundreds of applications, if you can imagine, in various locations, various data centers. It's mind-boggling, and you need a tool like UITest or a tool to kind of help you map that out. If you don't have something like that, it becomes very difficult to use spreadsheets. I've been in banks and other institutions that use spreadsheets, and it just got so cumbersome. And the problem is mistakes are made, and the last thing you want to have is mistakes in this process. You want to first identify your entire population, as I mentioned. You get those lists, and you continually update those lists. And at the same time, you want to actually know how often have we tested these? Is it monthly? Is it quarterly? All those things need to be worked out when you're working through your process. I don't know how you would do it without a solution to do that in this world, especially with all the changes that are going on. And then even think of divestitures, acquisitions. I have clients that are constantly acquiring other companies, and then how do you bring those key production systems into the fold? And then the next thing is a key thing at the bottom is looking at project managers. I'm a project manager in some aspects of some things that I do, and it's a very important task. For some of my clients, I'm actually the PM for governance and for the revalidation function. Is well, it just kind of goes along. You need someone who can really understand what's going on, cover the things I've been covering in terms of the scope, and then just the execution, and then following up with the individuals. I'm talking business leaders that assign these tasks for people to look at the systems and make sure that everyone under their control as information owners, as data owners, is properly responded back to, and any exceptions are noted. They need to take responsibility for any gaps that are found. This is done through tools such as UITest, that you want to make sure that these things are documented, follow up until the very end, and then closed out one way or the other. This is a screen just to kind of show you, I'm sure many of you work in very complex organizations. I know I do, and I'm like, it seems like every day there's something new being thrown at us. Obviously all these technologies make the world better, right? And I do love technology. I love automation. So don't get me wrong. I could not run my businesses without having technology in place. I always joke about with my team that works for me. I'm like, we have to deal with this password stuff, don't we, guys? And I kind of joke with them because they know what I do. And I said I shouldn't make fun of passwords and security, but we really do need security. It's very important. I think if you have the right security in place, but the thing is, look at all these systems on here. I'm sure many of your organizations have these in one way, shape, or form. One thing I'll say is if you're using things like Dropbox or Box, not putting those down because they're great solutions, just make sure that the security over them is what you expect. I tend to use solutions that are very, very highly secure. Making sure there's MFA, multi-factor authentication, encryption, and I actually have to use systems that are under FedRAMP standards and things like that. So I just always say, make sure you check that out. That's outside of this topic, but just to throw that out. And also making sure that the access rights to all these you always know where things are. You always know where these reviews stand, because every one of these systems is extremely important in the hierarchy of security. So just think of this map next time you're evaluating how many solutions you have in your organization.
Robert, I'll let you continue on roles-based access controls.
All right, thanks, Ashley. So I mentioned a little bit about, if you ever hear the acronym RBAC, that's roles-based access control. So then you'll know what we're talking about here. So one of the first things with roles-based access is the least privilege access. What does that mean? So I put it on here: only functions necessary to perform the required job based on the formal job description. And when I started out earlier on in my career, I was, new at all this stuff, and I'm just learning. And I was actually, at the time, I was more of an accountant / auditor, financial auditor. I'm like, ooh, I have all these functions, I can perform my job, and then I get transferred to another department, get promoted, what have you. And I learned at some cases, and for some large companies, that, oh, I still retained all my functions. No one really ever went and vetted these accesses. And guess what? I can still do things I used to do. Well, guess what? I found out later, someone said to me, they're like, that might not be a good thing. You might be causing the company harm because you have functions that are incompatible with new functions, such as, very rudimentary example is like basically receiving cash, receiving funds in, and then posting them to the general ledger, the ERP system, and then taking doing the bank deposit. In some cases, you could do all three. Not a good idea, because it's very easy to manipulate records and things to that sort. You have to have an oversight, a check and balance. That's separation of duties. So the idea is you want to implement the least privileged access for someone that they can get their job done. And if they transfer, you need to reevaluate the access. That would be on the, I always say do it on the leaving side as well as the joining side. Each manager needs to approve that before the person is released to go to the new department. And I think that's always worked well when I've seen that in place. If an individual group has access to a specific ERP, do they have access to all the functions, or can they actually function well with just one function or two functions? I think that needs to be evaluated by the leadership of that department. So that's another part of roles-based access. And this is part of what UITest helps to do, aside from just saying, is the person appropriate for the access, is digging down into those key functions. And then there's always areas I find that are sensitive areas: treasury, database administration, computer operations. It's usually financial or technology functions, but then there can also be a lot of things in the operational sections as well, organizations I review. So you really need to know who has access to what, and you never can accept it. Just let someone just have temporary access and just keep it open indefinitely. It's like me, I always say temporary, just give them a temporary ID, not assigned to them. The ID should always be assigned to an individual, not to just a name. There are exceptions to that when it comes to privilege use, and I'll get into that in a little bit, but for the most part, you always want to have an individual tied to an ID. And there's a term called zero trust architecture, and that basically, when you hear that, is usually only temporary access that stops after a given period of time. It kind of like gives you a time frame. Like it basically, you get set up, you're on for a day, and then it just expires. That's the best way to do it. There's other, it protects the risk of internal users, retaining that access for a long period of time, but it also helps with administration as well, and make sure that, it's not like you have to turn it off every time. You just know it's going to shut off automatically. That should always be tested, though. I would never just assume it's always working. That's something that your team members should test every so often, folks in that group.
And now we're going to talk about the least privileged access concepts. Back to you, Robert.
Okay, thank you. So this is an area where abuse can occur. That's one of the things I want to bring up. And I mentioned that you want to have least privileged access. I think that you want to document it, as I mentioned here. And then I'm just going to give you some examples of inherent risks in this area, and show you it might paint a better picture of what we're talking about here. So these are some of the reasons why you want to always ensure that you have your access under control. The first thing is we call it privilege abuse. You can call it different things, but I've seen so many cases where, and I always look at personnel like they really want to do a good job, and they're not out to steal from the company or cause the company harm. But now in these days, more and more, you see more and more of disgruntled employees for one reason or the other. And whether I don't go in whether it's nothing's ever justified, but I'm saying you always have to really be careful that someone's not going to come back and take what you have, or impact some of the processes that are in place. So that's one of the things we're talking about, privilege abuse. That could happen before someone is terminated, but it could also happen after someone leaves the company as well. And it as I said here, it leads to malicious or unintentional actions when accessing certain types of data. It could also just be, there's certain areas that are very sensitive that you don't want anyone tampering with. It can even be your databases or your logs. You definitely want to keep control of your security logs or your audit logs for any particular function. You need to identify those areas specifically, that those are very, very important and should have very limited access. And even if individuals tap into that area, that should be heavily logged and secured. Employer third-party terminations. I see a lot of cases where the whole intention is you remove someone the day they leave, and I'm talking a voluntary term, that someone gets a 2 weeks notice, you're going to cut off their payroll, you should cut off their security. Now, some organizations will just cut off their network, or they call Active Directory, and they'll say, we'll just cut off Active Directory, but we don't have to really worry about the rest of the applications because they can't access the system anyway. Well, then we find out that you go through that process, and then someone has a special access that doesn't require you to go through the network. It can be done remotely. It can be done directly into that application. And then what do you have? You have a problem. Then you have people that know this, and they go in after the fact if they're not, they have a problem with the company, or they just want to tamper around, see what they can do. And you can imagine the problems that could cause in terms of reputation risk, security risk, and business continuity, things like that. If there's a denial of service attack that could be caused by it, or who knows. There's so many things you read these days that occur, and a lot of them have to do with just too much access, or being too trusting and giving someone access to the system where you have the potential for a ransomware attack, a denial of service attack, things like that. So these things happen, and I've been parties to these kind of things for some of my clients, and it's not a good situation. Very, very costly and very damaging to their reputation. And then the last thing I have listed is licensing costs. This is kind of a minor thing compared to the top two, but you also don't want to have people having access to things that they don't really need, and you're paying for them. I mean, if smaller companies, it's probably not as big of a deal, but when you get to some larger companies and you have so many different licenses that are open, you're not tracking your licenses. This is called asset management, another area. That's another thing you want to make sure that you're really, you just keep track of who has access to what, and that actually could reduce some of your overhead as well. So just another byproduct of why you want to focus on user access rights. So just real quickly, I'll go through this because I'm looking forward to hearing my colleagues from UITest to do their presentation. And so put your access review procedure in place, get full support of the policy. It should be from the top. Once you get the reviews in place, ensure all requests are documented. I've already mentioned that. Any last minute requests, there should never be a case where you say, well, there's overnight situations with systems. I'll just mention that. I work a lot with developers, change control. Sometimes things break in the night. That's when you have an emergency procedure to give someone access to production, to sensitive areas of the system to fix them. It's kind of like having your plumber coming at night and fixing a leak that's, or when you say a leak, you actually have water gushing everywhere. You got to fix that. But the biggest thing is you document it and you close off the access in the morning. If you're using a shared ID, you want to put in something called a fire axe, or I always think of breaking the glass. They call it break glass controls, and then reset the password. In other cases, you don't need to do that if you're monitoring a specific user ID, and just elevate the privileged access through their ID, which is what I highly recommend. Then you can track all the actions of an individual. And then this has come up recently. If you even follow the news, in some cases, there's like sharing of user IDs, sharing of passwords, and things like that. You should never do that. That should never be allowed. That should be against policy, and there should be no exceptions. Even if one of the executives says, "Oh, I really need to do this," no, that's not something we do at the organization, and that's got to be heavily enforced. Next.
Now we're going to go over conducting a review. Robert, if you could just give us some insight into that.
Okay, I have some steps for that, and this is not the end all, but these are some things, and I'm specifically mentioning use of a tool like UITest to do this. Is periodic user access reviews. I do that at clients. Some are monthly, some are quarterly. I do some SOC reviews where I actually am a liaison between the auditors and the company. And quarterly is a very popular time. Quarterly reviews seems to be a happy medium for everything, but you need to make sure they're consistently done within a set time frame, and issues are remediated and closed out. Managing and tracking access provisioning. There's the provisioning process, a whole nother area. This kind of follows hand in hand with what we're talking about here, but that's the actual managing of leavers, movers, and joiners to the organization. And then we have access review campaigns, just to make sure you're familiar with one-to-many endpoints that are out in your environment. And then when new campaigns are launched, anything new, especially with acquisitions, managers and reviewers can be notified, hopefully by email or by an easy mechanism. And then having dashboards, I think that's one of the biggest things. I'll talk about what I would like to see in a tool like UITest is what can you have for dashboards and reporting for individuals that manage this, and again, reminders and the main thing is to really ensure you're compliant and you're staying consistent. One of the things the auditors are going to look for, are you following your governance documents, your policy standards, procedures, and then are you effectively doing what you say? I find so many places that have great policies, but they don't follow them to the T, and then they get written up for it because they're not following what they say they're doing. I just put some slides in here. I'm probably nearing the end of my presentation, my section to go in the UITest, but this is a good segue. Is product differentiating factors. I know my colleagues definitely have these in place. These are some of the things I like to see when I'm using some automated technology. Product that closes the gap in the enterprise and it covers a lot of the things we're talking about: user access reviews, identity governance, and compliance for systems. I do a lot of complex standards like the NIST 800-171, CMMC. There's a lot of things in that process that I really need a tool like UITest to do, or similar tool that you can go in and make sure that all these things are checked and you can reference them later when someone needs to see them. Also, installation and implementation. I've been on a lot of teams with this, and you want to select a provider that can really help work through your integration process, all your APIs, your interfaces to your other systems. There's a lot of that going on, and make sure that everything is all the data is complete as you do transfers over into these types of systems. So configuration is good, and then my company UITest can actually talk about how they're set up in terms of the cloud, because setting up in the cloud is like great, it's in the cloud, but getting in the cloud is a whole different story. You really need to have experts that really understand how the cloud works in terms of security, backups, business continuity, things like that. This is just an easy little wish list, simple solution. That's all I was like, simple but comprehensive, ensuring organizations compliant. I mean, compliance is a big thing, and ensuring you can use this for your reviews and your audits. Conduct your reviews on time with accuracy and completeness. Why not? That's exactly what we need. And then saving time. And I know leadership, they're saying, we're going to invest in a product. Are we going to get a return on our investment for the time we're going to save? There should be some type of time savings and efficiency and accuracy based on what you choose. So best practices, I'm kind of I'm just summarizing some of the things here. I would say the biggest thing is develop a formal governance policy or process. I mean, I can't emphasize that enough, that it needs to be formalized. You can't just start working through this, just throwing things together and just hope they work. That's going to set you up for failure. I've also seen organizations select solutions that they've invested a lot of money in the processes and tools, and they've wasted money. They had to scrap the whole thing and throw them out. That's a career limiting move in some cases, depending on what your spend was on those things. You've got to know how to put this all together from start to finish. And then once you get that all together, a formalized review procedure has to be consistent. You have to have the right individuals involved, project managers. And then I would say you also maybe want to get a secondary review check on things. And then also they're checking on employee permissions and entitlements, just to make sure it's being done properly. And then make sure that all your systems, your processes are all complete for owners that are assigned to the reviews.
Hello, Ashley. Sorry to interrupt here. Is it a good time to do a polling question here?
Absolutely.
Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, here is the first polling question up on your screens right now. So please go ahead, choose an appropriate response and hit the submit button to register your responses. And we'll give around 20 seconds here for this polling question for everybody to make yourself eligible for the credits. All right, last 10 seconds here, everyone. Then we'll close the polling question. And meanwhile, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat or in the Q&A panel. Okay, we'll close the polling question here. Thank you so much, and it's back to you, Ashley.
Thank you. Okay, back to Robert. What do the regulations require?
So what will we do without regulations? I mean, that's what makes the world go around, right, guys? So I work probably with almost every regulator you can name, from financial services to defense to in between, with I guess the state insurance department. So you guys all know the regulations that hopefully you do with the ones you work with in your organizations. I'm sure many to all you do that regularly, so you know what I'm talking about. I think it's dealing with the regulators is it's always an interesting journey, but we always want to make sure that, and I'm talking external auditors too. I used to be an external auditor, and I actually used to be a regulator. You want to make sure you get them what they need, and give them the right pieces of information. And my point is here is when you're using tools such as like a UITest or something that goes along with your process, it just makes the journey so much easier, where you can just run reports, provide what's needed. And also, and one of the things now with CMMC, the cybersecurity maturity model certification, you have to demonstrate that you've actually reviewed, and you could show evidence that even to the day, almost to the time, it's getting almost ridiculous, but you need a tool that's going to be able to show you that. In a lot of cases, manual processes sometimes don't cut it, unlike some of the automation that's out there now. And I've listed some of these things in bullet number 3, some of the different regulators you could deal with. I'm not sure what industries you're in, but I'm sure all the industries are represented on this webinar. And I just know that every review I've been part of, whatever side of the desk I sat on, it's always better to have automation and systems to back things up. And I think the bar is getting higher and higher for meeting compliance in many of the different areas, as you're aware of. And access just continues to be one of the key areas. It's even gotten worse now because of all the cyber attacks. It's just so important that we're on top of this. So that's what I'm talking about with compliance in this area.
Okay, thank you so much, Robert. Just for the sake of time, I'm going to skip over a few slides. So just bear with me for a couple seconds.
That's a good time to transition. That was great, Robert. And what we did is just took us through the practice and procedures at the enterprise, through your real life stories, and we'll have more time to talk to Robert at the end of this. I'm going to take it straight into the nuts and bolts of what are the solutions that actually can do this. And I mean, not just UITest, I mean the world. So I'm going to start with IGA and talk about the regulations and guidances. Take it away, Ashley. Okay,
Yeah.
Let's start with NIST. Okay, the granddaddy of guidances for all the other guidances is NIST 853 Rev 5, where it lays out succinctly for the world. That's what it is. It's released by the U.S. Department of Commerce for everyone to look in and say these are the best practices. Okay, now in those best practices are things like identity and access reviews covered. Damn right they are. Next. And that's why these show up in all the regulations. Okay. Number 1, identities and roles. I was just asked to comment on an SC Magazine article about this. Okay, Garrett, what about the cloud? What about the cloud? Guys, identity and access reviews and roles and permissions don't go away with the cloud. They should be replicated. In the best sites that we work with, I'm talking about me and the consultants like Robert, what they do is they quantify their accesses, policies by roles and groups. Well, let me just speak succinctly. They quantify them by roles and they implement them by groups. Next. If you could quantify them, if you're quantifying the privileges by roles, which are identified and quantified in your directories by groups, then why is that good? Because then you can review them. You can review them very easily. You got your concept of saying, okay, someone can get this Oracle data table if I put them in the group that says Oracle data table access. Okay. And then when the auditor comes in, you can run a report on that group and says, this was the people who have privileges on January 1st. This are the people that have now access on this on April 1st. And if you use a tool like UITest, you can see the changes. Next. This is the one that I always want to get asked about hacks. We are going to be hacked. We all know, probably everyone on the call has a concept of 0-day hack. 0-day attack is simply you're running, you got your systems going, you're patched as far as you're concerned. But guess what? The hackers figured out that some mechanism, I don't care if it's in your Kubernetes, in your VMware, if it's in your web server, it's in your Active Directory, that there's some type of vulnerability that can be implemented on you. Okay, that's a 0-day attack, which means you don't know about it. The vendor doesn't know about it. There's no patch. You are really vulnerable if you don't practice principle of least privilege. That's what we all understand, because what the attackers are looking to do is get on your system and then buy a 0-day attack and then escalate their privileges in some way so they can get into the valuable systems. And user credentials are very easy. So that's why we have to always ensure that the actual identity permissions and roles of those users is minimized. That's what POLP PRAC-6 says, is that each user is minimized. And how do we do that? That's what we're going to go into this tool, especially tie-up. Next. Okay, this is where there's good handoff from Robert to me. Okay, he was talking in general because he's done this for a living. This is his day job in his practice of Risk Cop Advisory LLC. What we're saying here is these are your actual regulations. That was a great polling question, and we'll do another one shortly, of where you're doing. Most of y'all are fighting the SOX battle in a good way. And SOX is all about access reviews and identity governance. But just remember this, and this is probably knowledge for everyone on the call that does this for a living, but for you who are new to this, the people in your organization that are doing these access reviews and doing the identity governance reports, they're replicating this stuff. That's what we found out when they did the TCO study of this, is that enterprises were, like the healthcare, they were doing these type of access reviews and reports for the HIPAA. They were doing it for the SOX. They were doing it for the SOC. And then, the guys are taking taking credit cards, doing it for PCI DSS. Now the new one, of course, is everyone who wants to take the money from the DoD, 300,000 of us, we have to meet CMMC regulations. In fact, we just did a webinar with the gentleman that was talked earlier. Look us up on YouTube about CMMC and identity governance. All of this stuff is relevant and replicated. Next. Let's talk a little about identity governance. This is a term which I can say the industry doesn't have a really good understanding. And I can say that for a fact because I've created identity management products. And if you asked me midstream, while I created a product called SecureAuth, what identity governance was, I would babble something incoherently. Okay. Identity governance is what happens after we implement the access controls. That's the Azure AD. That's your Okta. That's your ForgeRock. What is the roles and policies and groups that we administered, and why did we do it? It breaks out in two sections. Go. Identity lifecycle management, user provisioning, and access governance. Next. Those are the two sections. Identity lifecycle management is pretty obvious. We have a container here, and we got to move those identities over to the different resources. That everyone seems to understand. That is pretty quantifiable. Spearheaded by wonderful companies like SailPoint, Once in a Day, and the other provisioning systems. What's really important to know to everyone out there is the companies that are in identity management, like Okta and ForgeRock, are really doing much more work in that space. They're going to have tools and increasing their tools to push out those identities. But what has been ignored by the industry? Next. Access certification. Access certification. Like I said, I created the product from scratch. And if you tell me that, Garrett, so you've been doing this IAM product for 8 years, where's your access certification? I would have babbled something about SAML or OIDC or some other thing, et cetera, or talk about how I'm eventually going to have SCIM. No, access certification is why we're on this call. That is being done manually. That is done manually in most accounts. I've gone to Fortune 500 accounts where they are publicly traded, and I can't mention them, but straight out, they're doing their access certifications manually. And that takes a lot of time. If we get to it, ask Ashley. She has a part on her presentation to go this, or we can ask her directly to walk you through the TCO. It's unbelievable how much time is spent. Next. Access reviews. And this is where I sum it up and then hand it into a solution. So that's your cue, Tayyab. You're up next. So access reviews, this is identity governance. This is the IGA. This is the stuff that our IAM vendors know exist, but just don't do because they're busy doing other stuff. You got to review your users. You got to review your groups. This is where I start ranting, because teams, where the facilities are there in the IAM products. And I'm taking Active Director. I've been working with LDAP for 25 years or whatever. They're there. The groups are there. What we have to do is a better job of, say, quantifying, using those groups as roles, and then implementing that across the board. Then it makes your job easier, and it makes the task easier, especially with the tool of UITest that Ty is going to show you. That is really cool. Then you review the applications, you certify the permissions, you should delegate out the authority to certify the permissions. That's what a review should be able to do. You should auto delegate out to the right manager, so you're not sitting there hunting and pecking and figure out which people should review what. And the tool should also revoke permissions and allow you to comment. That's what's involved in an access review. And these are the quantifiables that takes weeks to implement a good access review unless you have a tool. And Tayyab, that was a complete tie into you. But why don't we do this? Sam, why don't you kick off with another poll?
Sure, thank you so much, Garrett. Ladies and gentlemen, here is the second polling question up on your screens right now. So please go ahead, choose an appropriate response and hit the submit button. Are the access reviews handled by someone and can choose multiple by the IT, compliance, or security? And we'll give 15 more seconds for everybody to submit the responses for this polling question. All right, so I'll close the polling question here, and the responses are pretty much neck and neck. So let's continue with, I think, Garrett, we are going to continue with Tayyab now.
So next we're going to have Tayyab go over the UITest and access reviews, and he's going to give you the technical overview.
Great, that sounds good. So let's just head over to, so why are the access reviews needed, and what do you need to perform one, right? So the first thing is that the access reviews are basically to attest to different users if they have multiple roles or they belong to different groups or applications. We actually provide a platform for reviewers to come in and review the person's access, or if they want to see who the manager of that user is, they can also go ahead and check that from the information available underneath the users and users tab, and they will be able to simply delegate that out to that manager if they don't know who the specific person or the responsible person for that user is. And we also have different features. For example, if you wanna go ahead and hand this review over to multiple reviewers, you can also assign multiple reviewers for that. Or if you want a group to be assigned to that, for example, if a user belongs to a IT or the HR group and you want them to have insight to that user's roles or access, you can simply assign a group to it as well. And then we also provide really sophisticated reports for all of that has been done or the actions that have been performed on UITest. And then you will also receive, for example, you will be once you're performing an access review on UITest, you will be able to set reminders or due dates so that people who are responsible for it can come in and do them on time. So they will be sent an automated reminder for those as well. And they will also be able to add notes in the section. For example, if they attest to a user and they revoke a user's access, they will still have the option to enter their notes and explain their reason why they revoke the person's access. So next slide, please. Okay, so what are the features for campaigns that are made inside UITest? So the first thing is that we have different types of campaigns. For example, you can choose from a user campaign or a group campaign or an application campaign. A user campaign is when you want to see how many users or which users are actually reporting to a specific manager, or a group such as the IT group or the HR, or if you want to see a specific application, for example, Salesforce, Jira, or any of those, you can also check that as well. So after that, our system has a GUI-driven campaign system. You can basically go inside and if you're a reviewer or an auditor, you can simply just go inside and you will have the option to revoke or certify a person's access just by clicking on the user's details, and which is pretty simple. It is made pretty simple by UITest because it gives you the options right on the go, and you can simply check all the details that are required to perform basic review of the user. Next slide, please. So this is the option that you will see once you are inside UITest. As you can see that we have 3 different audits that we provide to our users. They can actually access application audits, group audits, or user audits. And yes, so multiple reviewers. So we, as I was telling you earlier, so what we can do is, for example, if a user reports to a manager and you want another person to have insight to that information, for example, the HR should also be responsible for that person's access. So what we can do is we have an and or situation. So what a person can do is they can simply assign the review to the manager and that specific person in that other group, or the senior manager. They can actually assign 2 or 3 people at the same time for that person's review. So the auto delegation feature. So what the auto delegation feature does is it picks up the manager's information from the bio or the information that is provided once you upload a CSV file to our system, or when you provide that information. So it automatically picks up the information about the user's manager. And when you click on the auto delegate feature, what happens is that it sends a link to the manager with simple information such as that, hey, this user has an access review coming up and you need to get in and check this person's access. So it's pretty simple. They just click on a link and they will go straightly to UITest where they will see that person's information, which actually helps a lot to simplify this process, and it actually saves a lot of time. As you can see on this screen, we have under the More Actions tab, you can simply click on the Auto Delegate feature after clicking on any of the check marks for the users, and then the email will be sent out to that manager. So another really good thing about UITest is that, for example, if you have a campaign that needs to be scheduled, quarterly or biannually, or at the end of the month, you can actually schedule different campaigns using our tool. So what that does is basically it alerts you when the campaign is, another reminder. So what it does is it actually sends you an email that, hey, this review is coming up and you need to go in and have a look at the user's access. So what it does is it basically keep tracks of the time, and then you remember that audits need to be performed quarterly, or in certain cases at the end of every month. So when you schedule something, it's pretty easy because it gives you a reminder to do them accordingly. So on this screen, as you can see, once you've created a campaign inside UITest, you can simply click on the calendar option, and from here you can select the due date or any of the specific date that you want to, or different days by clicking on the check marks, and you can click on done, and it will automatically be scheduled and also provide you a reminder afterwards. So the timestamp creation in the reports is pretty important because it helps you understand when this action was taken or when this review was scheduled for. So whenever a person or an auditor comes in to review their user's access, and they go ahead and certify or revoke that person's access, a timestamp is created in that report in our system, and which is pretty useful. For example, if you have any access review coming up or a campaign coming up. So what it does is it actually provides proof. It actually gives you documentation that this was done at the specific time or date. In this slide, you can see that all the timestamps have been generated once you complete any of your campaigns that you have created so far. And once you've attested to any of the users, a timestamp has been generated under the reviewed on tab. And it will also show you the action that the user has taken in the object action or review tab as well, with the person's name in it. So it actually adds a lot to it.
Let's do this, Tyab, in an issue of time. Can you just show
Yes.
a little of this functionality and we'll skip the slides?
Yeah, sure. I can do that right now.
Perfectly.
Let me just
And
share my
everyone
screen.
out there, just write us at sales or info@uittest.com and we'll give you more information. But let's
Tyab,
show a
I'm
little
gonna
of the- Yeah.
I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and hand it over to you.
Amazing.
Thanks.
Okay. Good. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
100%.
Okay, so this is the dashboard for UITest. Once you're logged into UITest, you will see the number of audits that you have completed so far, or if you have any pending audits, or the total ones inside your system. Plus, it will also show you the number of users that you have and the kind of application or group or event audits that you have remaining in your system. So let's get started with the CSV audits. This system is actually made really user-friendly and it's for everyone. So for example, you want to, what we can do is we can actually import a really simple CSV file into our system. It doesn't have to be complicated or any of that. And you won't even have any kind of issues when, for example, I know that for a fact, whenever you try to upload a CSV file, there's a formatting issue. So we don't have that because we did a really smart thing with our tool and we made a mapping template field. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to be uploading a file right now for you. It's pretty simple. It just has username, first name, and last name, and the relevant information for a user. And then I'm going to name my audits. So for example, if this is for an application, I'm going to say Salesforce. And then, as I was telling you earlier about the due date, you can simply select the due date from here, and then you can click on next. So this is the mapping field. you can actually go ahead and map all of the CSV fields that you just uploaded. So it actually helps you avoid the formatting issue that normally people face. So what you can do is you can simply select for user ID, you can select username, then for first name to first name, last name to last name, and then username again for username, email address. And then we also have another option. For example, if a person has multiple roles, so you can actually separate them by comma using our application, and it will pick up. So after that, you can select the application and the manager. So you don't have to select all of these fields. You just have to select the ones that are necessary for you. And then we also have custom fields. For example, if you put in a specific manager's field or an application field, you can actually just edit this field and go with that as well. And another thing that I would like to tell you is that you don't even have to complete this mapping process every single time, because you can actually save this mapping by clicking on this check mark and giving it a name, as I've done right here. So after you upload another file, you will see your mappings right here, and you can simply click on them to select them. So once the audit is created, I'll show you what it looks like from the inside as well. And then I will head over to the main feature, that is date and time. So I clicked on Salesforce, that was my audit. And as I can see here, that some other information is available for me here, which I did input in the CSV. So right here, I can see the user's name, their email address, their user ID, and the user's manager. So in order to get this access reviewed, so what we need to do is we need to simply click on these tick marks right here. And then we can simply click on the delegate feature right here, which will give us an option to add a reviewer, or if they belong to 2 or 3 people, you can add multiple email addresses right here. Or if you want to assign a group to it, as I was telling you earlier, that you can actually assign the IT group or the HR group, you can simply type in their name and they will pop up, and then you can click on assign. So after that, the best feature in this is that, for example, you don't know who the manager for this user is. So what you want to do is you can simply click on the auto delegate feature, or when you don't know who should be auditing this person, you can simply click on the auto delegate feature. It will pick up the manager's information from right here and send him an email with the link for this campaign, and then they will come inside and review this person's access. So here's the important step. Once you assign a review to a person, they will only be able to see that person's information. For example, in this campaign, we have 4 different users, but I only assigned this one to a manager. So he will only be able to see this person's information, not the other 3. As I know that it is important for a security purpose as well, that we don't want this information going into the wrong hands. So we try to make it very secure for our users as well. And then let's see what happens. For example, if I go ahead and click on this tick mark, and then let's say I certify all of these 4 users for their access, and I click on apply, I want to see what happens next. So here you can see that now I have some more information about what had just happened. So I can see right here the auditor's name, what action they took, and when it was taken upon. Don't worry about the audit user that's showing up right now. That's only because I'm logged in as audit user. Once you're logged in, it will show your name or any of the other reviewers' name. So the timestamp is basically pretty important because it adds a lot to your review. It actually tells you that, okay, this was completed at this specific time and date, and it helps you with your completing your documentation and leaving a paper trail of all of this information, which is pretty essential. And even at this time, once you're completed your review, you don't even have to take a screenshot of this and send out via email. You can simply download a report in any of the format you choose, or you can print out all of this information. So let's get
perfect. That's a good place to stop because the team is begging to do another poll question. So
okay.
let's do it. Let's do a poll
Sure.
question, Sam.
Sure, thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, the third polling question is right up on the screens, and we are getting right on time to wrap up things here. So, any closing comments from your end, guys?
No, it's all good. Ashley, can you put up the screen for how to contact us to have more discussions?
1 second.
As you can see, guys, we have lots of information on this, and we're glad to talk to you directly and get both Robert and Tayeb on the call. And in fact, there was a whole section that actually had capable of doing it we didn't do. Okay.
All
So
right.
right here,
Mhm.
you can contact us at info@uattest.com. We did have some more presentation to share that we didn't get the time to do. So any questions, please feel free to reach out to us and we'll respond to you.
All right, thank you so much, Ashley. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank the team USAT for giving us such an informative, insightful, and one of the most exciting webinars. I hope everybody enjoyed this session. Do let us know your feedback, share in the chat or in the Q&A panel. And here is also a link in the chat panel. Feel free to reach out to team UITest. It creates and supports the audit tools for the purpose of automating and simplifying the compliance process. Feel free to use the link and use them as a resource. And one more important thing, in order to obtain your credit certificates for this session, you'll receive an evaluation form in the next 24 hours after the completion of this webinar if you have answered all the polling questions. Also, if you need to view the recording of this webinar or if you have any further questions, please feel free to let us know here in the chat. Please feel free to email us on support@my-cp.com, right? And we are seeing some wonderful responses in the chat. So Garrett and team, you did a really wonderful job here. Just says thank you for this great session. So wonderful job, guys, once again. And that being said, thank you so much, everyone, for being such a wonderful audience. And take care of yourself and your loved ones. Stay safe and stay healthy, everyone. Thank you and see
All
you
the
soon,
best.
team. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye, guys.